The Bone Mages. They cast Bone Spear now. They cast Bone Splinters now. Well, in reality, you cast Bone Spear out of your minions, and for some reason it triggers all of your effects. But what you see before you is the mad ramblings and scramblings of somebody trying to figure out how all of this works, the beginning of a data sheet that I immediately stopped putting data into when I realized I can make my Bone Mages overpower, something that blood builds have been desperate to be able to make happen since the inception of this game, but we'll just go ahead and ignore the fact that the devs have spit in the eyes of blood builds again. They actually also ninja nerfed them, and hopefully that's a bug, but that's another video. We gotta talk about Bone Mages on the Bone Spear Necromancer, because this one is actually insane. Now, to understand why I have fallen into a pit of insanity, you just have to look at this modifier for Bone Mages. It now says that your Bone Mage has a 25% chance to cast Bone Splinters or Bone Spear if it's on your action bar. And very similar to a special little ring by the name of Ring of Mendeln, you may think that scaling your minions or increasing their damage or making them more powerful would increase the damage of this effect. And just like the Ring of Mendeln, you'd be wrong. That's right, the Ring of Mendeln, the one that says that every single time that your minions attack, they're going to empower their own attacks and deal bonus damage. The Bone Spear and Bone Splinters that your Bone Mages cast are actually you doing them. And I don't mean it does your damage or it uses the same effects as you. No, it counts as you triggering the effects, you casting the skills. It absorbs and uses buffs that say when you cast a core skill, when your core skill does this. It also doesn't scale off of their damage and instead reads how much essence you have, whether or not you have ossified essence, whether or not you have serration, your crit chance, and your modifiers. Which is actually a good thing. It means that Bone Mages are going to be good on a Bone Spear Necromancer because you're basically just getting free Bone Spears for no cost, spitting out in random directions. Now, whether or not it's going to be better for your build than you particularly want, really just comes down to flair. But let me go ahead and prove some of these things to you, because it does sound completely insane, and I understand that. But let's start off with like the weirdest one, the one that actually tuned me into the fact that something interesting was happening here. So while I was standing here attempting to calculate their damage and my damage and see whether or not it was the same damage and whether or not they were reading how much maximum essence I had, etc., I was watching them attack these monsters. As you can see, every once in a while they spit out Bone Spears, which is pretty cool. The Bone Spears are critting, you know, they're doing pretty decent damage, and you'll notice that their base damage is doing almost nothing in comparison. Again, I haven't invested in their damage at all. I've only invested in my Bone Spear damage. And what that means is that you can basically completely ignore them and get fully empowered versions of your own Bone Spear casts, albeit a little bit chaotically, a little bit hard to kind of tell them where to go and who to attack, but at least it's a very cool thing. And I'm generally hoping that while I'm faffing about right now, we might see it happen. But basically, after we were doing this for long enough, we realized that one of them overpowered. Now, why is that interesting? Well, it turns out your minions can't overpower. They do not inherit your 3% chance to overpower. They do not scale with overpowered damage. They don't look at fortify. They don't care about max life, etc. They normally cannot fortify. But the Necromancer can, and when they cast Bone Spear, and that Bone Spear overpowered randomly 3% of the time, my brain went into hyperdrive. How many things say when you overpower, or if you were to overpower, do this? And the testing got pretty aggressive. For our first example, we're going to look at Blood Boil. Now, the interesting part about Blood Boil is that your Bone Mage's Bone Spear, which is your Bone Spear, is going to read the top part that says when your core skill overpowers, you are going to spawn volatile orbs. The second part that says every 20 seconds, your next skill is guaranteed to overpower, for whatever reason, doesn't empower your mages. And you might go, Mac, that makes complete sense, right? That absolutely should work that way. And just let me go ahead and show you, I'm going to overpower my next attack. It's going to spawn the blood orbs. It's these little volatile orbs that they can't crit, they can't overpower, but they do work with attack reduces cooldown on boots for evade. I already covered that in a different video, but it's just like a really interesting thing that you can do with them. But when we have our Bone Mages out, you notice that we can wait the 20 seconds, get the proc, my next attack will overpower, and get them to start attacking, and then they'll cast Bone Spear. And then here we go. Okay, great. He cast Bone Spear, but I still have the Blood Boil bonus. Okay, I haven't proven anything yet, right? Well, let's look at Banishlord's Talisman. Banishlord's Talisman says that after I spend 274 primary essence, my next core skill is guaranteed to overpower. It's basically the exact same thing as Blood Boil, except Blood Boil says your next skill is guaranteed to overpower. This one says your next core skill. And that's, I think, the kicker here, the thing that's so important. And then also your crits that overpower deal bonus damage. Now let me go ahead and use up a bunch of essence. Make some with the bug on Decompose that says when you spam it, you generate double the essence. Go ahead and ignore that for right now. I also covered that in a previous video. But yeah, if you want to double your essence gen on Decompose, just spam it instead of channeling it. All right, there we go. I now have my 275 essence spent. I now have my Banishlord's Talisman. I'm going to leave Blood Boil on though, because I want to show you that I'm not making this up. And I'm going to go ahead and summon my mage. I'm going to use a skill which can't overpower, which is Decompose. And when they cast Bone Spear, let's go ahead and see it. It took until the last attack, but you'll notice that their Bone Spear overpowered. It absorbed the buff that I got from Banishlord's Talisman, and because it overpowered, it triggered Blood Boil. The doors that something like this opens up seem infinite at first, and luckily I've gone through and tested literally just about everything that me and both my YouTube and my Twitch chat could think of that possibly interacts with this, and the list is a long one. How impactful is this? I don't believe we've fully delved down to like the ultimate end all be all list, but there's some pretty cool stuff that you can do in here. And while I tested it to a much smaller degree, there's even cooler stuff that you can do with Bone Splinters, because they count as you casting Bone Splinters. So when they do it, you generate essence. When they do it, it's going to give you crit chance. When they do it, it's going to apply vulnerable. So there's a lot that goes into that. Let's go through the list of things that I know works with this, meaning that your bone mages can trigger all of these effects for you and benefit from or steal these effects from you in situations where you otherwise may have not intended them to. One of the easiest ones here is critical strikes grant movement speed. Whenever your bone mages were to crit on their bone spears, you will gain the movement speed. Similarly, whenever they crit with their bone spears, you will gain attack speed. Funnily enough, you gaining attack speed will then grant them attack speed, making them attack faster and more likely to cast bone spear before they die, and then give you the attack speed again. It doesn't like continuously add up, but they can basically maintain their own 25% increased attack speed bonus while you just run through fields of monsters doing absolutely nothing. Cadaverous is an interesting one, where you respawning your skeleton mages via raised skeleton will consume a corpse. This will then empower your next core skill cast. So then when your bone mages cast Bone Spear, it will then eat Cadaverous, empowering their bone spears that they cast. That one isn't nearly as powerful as you may think it is. My first thought was using this with Ring of Sacrilegious Soul as well as Black River. And then basically all you worry about is casting Corpse Explosion, and they'll be the Bone Spear Necromancers for you. It's actually not a terrible concept, but mostly I don't think that you'll be able to eat corpses fast enough and have enough corpses in general to be continuously buffing them, and I don't think that you have an aspect slot for it, but it is something that you can do. So it's just like interesting that they feed into their own system again in this same way, where the Sacrilegious Soul will cast Raised Skeleton, empowering the next one who does Bone Spear to then have an increased damage to it. And while I can get through the entirety of the list, and I literally just have my list here, and I guess I'll read through them. One, anything that says that you will double cast, they also double cast. So the chance for Bone Spear projectiles to cast twice not only makes it so that your Bone Spear can cast twice, but also the shards that bounce back can also multiply, and they all roll their own chance, which is very weird. But your bone mages, bone spears, also can double up, and then the bone shards that come back from their bone spears can also double up. It reads every single modifier that you have for bone spear. So when I put on enhanced bone spear so that they get bone shards, they get bone shards. When I add on supernatural to be able to apply vulnerable, they apply vulnerable. Or if you have vulnerable from something else, all of you can gain 5% increased crit chance and 2 additional bone shards, which again, those bone shards can also be doubled from the new temper effect. So your one bone mage can cast 2 bone spears that then shoot back 10 bone shards if you happen to get lucky and roll that 30% chance that many times in a row. And again, just to reiterate, while your bone mages are doing it, it is absolutely just your bone spear triggering from them. So it gains the damage bonus from Imperfectly Balanced without costing any additional essence, because it doesn't cost essence when they cast it, because it's a triggered effect from them. Just right there, they can trigger Compound Fracture for you. You'll also notice that they've been triggering Disobedience for me. Their base attacks don't do these things, but when they cast Bone Spear, I mean you cast Bone Spear, it is you doing the damage, so Disobedience stacks add up. This is one of the biggest pain points on Minion builds, is that their damage doesn't trigger Disobedience, so it's very difficult on a pure Minion build for you to rely on that for your armor value. Now, you just can when you're using Bone Mages. The weirdest part, and the thing that like first clued me into something really mechanically wild was happening here, and I know I've now said this like 3 or 4 times, but I had all these various eureka moments while chat was just saying like, hey, test this, what about this, have you thought about this, etc. And the Ossified Essence passive increases their Bone Spear damage because it's just your Bone Spear damage. It reads how much essence you have at the time of cast, and when they trigger it, will deal damage according to the benefit that you get from this, as well as Serration. So by keeping up your essence at 100% the entire time and them being the only ones casting Bone Spear, they are always casting at their maximum effectiveness. And while it's obviously not going to be faster than you just casting Bone Spear yourself, being able to automate Bone Spear while also automating Corpse Explosion with Black River and Sacrilegious Soul, and also the Raised Skeleton will be automated, you can just sit there and be a fully automated Bombardier Necromancer, a fully automated Bone Spear Corpse Explosion Necromancer, getting the benefits of your full multipliers while literally never clicking a button. Now I hear what your next question is. Mac, if it's them doing it and it's taking all of your modifiers, what if you also increase their damage? What if you give them Cult Leader and enough attack speed to hit the maximum to be able to get a whopping total of 150% damage multiplier? What if you give them a huge amount of additive damage? What if you increase their summon damage and use Dead Razor Glyph to increase it even further? None of that does anything to the Bone Spears. I'll say it again. Increasing their damage does nothing to increase the Bone Spear procs from them. It only looks at the Necromancer's damage. It only scales from you. It's literally you, like some kind of wild puppeteer, casting Bone Spears out of them, and it doesn't give a single lick about any of their stats. And while that sounds bad at first glance, what it realized at that point is that you can literally completely ignore Cult Leader, Dead Razor, scaling their damage, giving them additive damage, getting affixes for them. You don't have to worry about any of that at all. You just get to build a fully optimized Bone Spear Necro and just get free Bone Spears for the cost of a skill slot. And in most Bone Spear builds, if you never really noticed, you don't actually have 6 skills to cast all the time. You want to cast Bone Spear, Bone Storm, sometimes Corpse Tendrils and Decrepify, sometimes Blood Mist. That's kind of about it. If you're really lacking for early game stats or skills, you can throw on Bone Splinters to generate essence. Obviously, instead of using either like Bone Storm or the Blood Mist, people like to put on the Corpse Explosion to gain the Corpse Explosion package. You just fit skeletons right into that 6 skill slot right there and actually run them for completely free. Now, I did save the best for last, and hopefully people listened enough to my mad ramblings to hear these parts, but they also read your unique items and can trigger Lucky Hit. And I don't mean some weird interactions with Abhorrent Decrepify. I don't mean some offshoot, weird combinations of stuff. No, they just trigger Lucky Hit because it's you casting Bone Spear. So anything that your Bone Spear can trigger, they can trigger. Let me go ahead and toss on Deathly Visage, the thing that says that my Bone Spear is going to leave behind echoes. Let me go ahead and get myself a couple Bone Mages. Walk back so you can see the fireworks. And then let me attack. They leave behind the echoes that do full damage because it's scaling off of you, the echoes that increase your lucky hit chance because they count as your Bone Spear leaving behind projectiles. It's your Bone Spears. They trigger them for you. Fists of Fate. Remember these? Weren't these interesting? Fist of Fate sure say 4 different lucky hit effects and your attacks randomly deal up to a total of 300% of their base damage. The Bone Mages are effectively wearing the Fists of Fate. If I were to summon all of my Bone Mages, and it's going to be a little bit hard to see all this stuff, but they can increase the amount of damage that I'm going to do, they can give me back primary resource, they can immobilize their targets for 2 seconds, and they can daze targets for 2 seconds. And then their damage will be modulated between 1% and a 300% damage multiplier. So if I were to fully spend all of my essence here, and then start attacking, and then hopefully you'll see it applying daze, applying different effects, doing random amounts of damage, leaving behind the Deathly Visage. And then if I were to get really lucky, because obviously it's a little bit low, I don't have a ton here, I will generate essence from their attacks because of this. Critical strikes with bone skills increase your essence regeneration. Damn straight, bone mages can trigger that for you. So them attacking is literally generating more essence for you without having to cast a single skill. Interestingly enough, Voracious doesn't work. Voracious says that killing an enemy with a core skill refunds 29% of its base cost. It can only happen once per skill cast. Watching them kill monsters continuously with bone spears, this never triggered, and it's because it's not refunding a cost because they do not spend your essence. Similarly, I don't think that Mother's Embrace will work, but I do not have one to trigger it or to test it. But talking about unique items, Doombringer's lucky hit chance to do an explosion of damage and then reduce monsters' damage, your Bone Spear mages can now trigger that for you. Azure Wrath, the new weapon that can be used by Necromancers that has lucky hit deal cold damage, Bone mages can trigger that for you as well. Have you wanted to be a cold necromancer this entire time? Go ahead and throw on Frostburn, lucky hit chance to freeze. Penitent Greaves, you do bonus damage to chilled targets. Azure Wrath, chance to lucky hit apply cold damage. And go ahead and get the new Temper that says that you have a lucky hit chance to proc a huge amount of cold damage. And then watch your Bone mages, which are strictly better than your cold mages, just lay waste in a winter wonderland while you sit back and relax. Now, how good are your bony little guys? How good is the actual build? Well, sadly, we're gonna have to wait for that. I didn't think that testing how all these various proc effects work together would take me the better part of 4 hours and the majority of my sanity, but I'm glad that we did the testing because now I think I have a fully formed understanding of the mechanics of this effect. Whether or not I think that it's good or I think that it should work this way is a completely different conversation, but I'm now going to work on actually putting together the build that I think would best work with this now that we have that understanding. But I want to get this video out to people because there were so many different mechanics that I know are just like wildly unintuitive, incredibly hard to test, and just kind of ridiculous when you think about what you have to put together to make the connections possible to actually walk away with a list of stuff that works. But TLDR, for anybody looking into this, your bone mages count as you casting Bone Spear. It has nothing to do with them at all, except that they are the vessel that has to do it. You do not need to scale their damage. You can only scale your damage. They all will trigger lucky hit according to how Bone Spear normally would. Anything that says it modifies Bone Spear will also modify it. Again, Deathless Visage will modify their Bone Spear. Chance for Bone Spear to cast multiple times will modify their Bone Spear. Anything that says when your core skill does X, that will apply to their Bone Spear, etc., etc. You can literally make them overpower if you want to with Banished Lord's Talisman. There's something here for this build. It seems incredibly synergistic. It hopefully will help to increase the single target damage of Bone Spear, which oddly enough is its weakest point. And then on top of all of that, since you're already going to be crit capped, huge attack speed, etc., Mendeln is going to scale off of you. You can very easily toss in skirmishers, which say every single time that you crit, they're going to auto crit with another 1.5 times multiplier, and basically just toss all of this in, actually have a huge army of a bodyguard, and enjoy the benefits of minions on the Bone Spear build, which is something that we've been waiting a really long time to do. There you go. That's what I got for you. This is just like the tech demo of everything that works. If you're brand new here and you've been enjoying the videos as of late, consider subscribing to the channel. It would help me out a ton. We're trying to get back into the YouTube algorithm now that people are more interested in the game, and the PTR is just being so fruitful and so many people are able to enjoy it. It honestly makes me incredibly happy that people are playing the game and being like, hey, I'm excited. But as always, jump into the PTR if you haven't already. We need to get as much feedback, bug testing, and information to the hands of the developers as possible so that when we roll into Season 4, we have the best version of the game that we could possibly hope for. As always, if you wouldn't mind throwing a like onto the video, that would also help me out a ton. But that's enough of me shilling for myself. Thank you so much for watching this video. I truly hope that it helps. And I look forward to seeing you in the next one.